So here we are, divided by this virtual platform, but at the same time united by our love of photography. Now this thing here, the camera's aperture, or should I say the lens's aperture setting, what can you tell me about that? What do you know about it? And how do you use this fantastic addition to our cameras? This crucial feature on our lenses in our photography has two jobs to perform. One technical and one more creative. But are you using your aperture settings to their full potential? And if all your shots are mostly taken at f8, then probably not. So technically, the aperture is there to control the amount of light reaching the sensor and works alongside the shutter speeds and in tandem, or should that be in a threesome, with the ISO. A wide aperture lets in more light, a smaller one lets in less light. No great revelation there, of course. And as we know, these changes are measured in fractions, with f2 for the wider aperture and f22 for the smaller one. But as well as controlling the amount of light coming in through the lens, the aperture also controls or affects depth of field. One setting creates less depth of field, f2 say, and one creates more, f22. And that depth of field, of course, changes with the lens that we use. Therefore, f8 on a 28mm lens renders more depth of field than f8 on a 200mm lens. So that's the technical side. I'm probably not telling you anything new here, am I? But we all need to know that bit of technical knowledge to be able to use these changes creatively. Technically, they can help create a well-exposed picture. Technically, they can create a picture that looks nice and sharp throughout, if needs be. A small aperture, therefore, records the majority of your chosen scene in sharp focus. This is typical of your average scene or landscape view perhaps. Use a small aperture of f11 or f16 and you're good to go. Everything is in focus from front to back. That's the technical approach. All very good, all very practical, but maybe a bit boring too. Used creatively though, those aperture values are one of the best ways to make your images stand out and give them impact. It's only when you start to use those aperture settings to your advantage that you can be more creative. The creative approach is pushing that concept, that technical aspect, as far as you can. So attach a wide angle lens, select a small aperture, and then get close. Get really close to your foreground subject. Maximize the depth of field. Push your aperture to f22 and see how much depth of field you can actually squeeze out of this combination. It's only when you get close that you start to see the creativity of these values. This is often my approach. If I want to use those small aperture values, I want the viewer to see those represented in my pictures. f8 is all very good, but f16 and f22 is where the fun begins. These, however, may be the settings you've been told to avoid. These may be the aperture values you've been told not to use. But how do you know if that's true until you've tried and found out these settings have drawbacks yourself? I don't think it really matters or applies when you're seeking to be more creative. Sometimes the technical aspects can get in the way of just being more creative. Now that's one end of the aperture scale, the smaller values. But what about the other end? Again, another piece of advice you may have heard is to always stop your lens down a couple of stops. Close it down to f4 instead of using it wide open, as this is where your lens will perform at its best, especially if it's a cheaper lens. Well, I say stuff that. So let's open wide. Let's shoot with the aperture at its maximum setting and see what this can produce. With such a limiting depth of field, everything is out of focus except for a very small area, the point that you actually focus on. Now, I'm not talking about your average portrait shot here. This is a great way, of course, to shoot portraits, to help blur out the background and make your subject stand out. But we're pushing the boat out here, even if it is a portrait. We're trying to be more creative, so just how far can you push this? What subjects can we shoot like that? What effect can we get with some of these wider aperture values? What can we actually focus on and what will happen in the background? Or the other way around. Maybe we're blurring the foreground. Maybe that's how to be more creative here. And then, which lens will give you the best effect doing this? How will this change when using a wide-angle lens compared to, say, a telephoto lens? Now, if you don't know all the answers here, I'm questioning your photography. If you don't know, you're just not experimenting enough. You're not being creative enough. You need to go and try. So you may have used your telephoto lens wide open for this natural depth of field effect, but how many times have you tried your wide-angle lens like this? Wide-angle lenses are usually chosen to extend depth of field, but even they can render some of the background out of focus. How many shots have you tried like that? So that's apertures and using them for depth of field. And of course you can try all these ideas with a wide-angle lens, a telephoto lens or a standard lens. The options are endless really, but I bet you probably haven't explored all of them yet. So now, what about the exposure side of things? How do we use apertures to get more creative with exposure? Well, first you can try opening up your aperture again and see what the resulting corresponding shutter speed becomes. Crank up your ISO too as much as you dare, and now see what happens. So in daylight, your shots now would probably become very overexposed. Well, okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. But if you wait until it gets dark, very dark, well, what about now? High ISO, wide aperture, and now hopefully a working shutter speed that you can use to shoot handheld without the need of a tripod. Now you can go out in the dark and shoot pictures of the dark on the mean streets where there is minimal light. Creative night shots. But you may be saying, Craig, what about the depth of field? With those wide apertures, hardly anything will be in focus. Well, you'd be right, but you don't need it to be. It's dark. Most of the scene will be in shadow, and you probably need to underexpose your shots even to force the camera to record it as such, like this. Your light source is your subject. That's what you focus on, and the rest of the scene can be out of focus, as we won't really see that. Now you're getting moody and creative shots by using your aperture values to control exposure. So here you're basically underexposing for creativity. You need to tell the camera to override its normal settings and purposely make the result a bit darker than it recommends. But now, doing that, the camera will change the shutter speed, and to your advantage. If you've selected the widest aperture in aperture priority mode and underexpose, now you can shoot handheld. But you can change the aperture value to overexpose your results too, for another way of being creative. So if your camera suggests that you use f5.6 for the perfect exposure, what happens if I tell you to use f3.5 or f2.8 instead? Well, your images will be overexposed, you're probably saying. Perfect, you can thank me later. What? Why would you want your shots overexposed? Well, to create a high key effect, of course. Again, another creative approach. Give your results a light, airy feel. Let those highlights burn out. Soften those shadows and give your images a lighter look. This is the high key effect. So there's a reason why I choose to shoot in aperture priority, and that's because I want full control of my apertures so I can shoot with creativity. The less images I can shoot at f8, the better. f8 is such a square setting, so boring, so beige, so middle of the road. Everybody shoots at f8. f8 and be there is the expression you may have heard before. f8 then is for when you want your subjects to take priority and not necessarily the creativity. But I say it often works the other way around too. Using a different aperture to f8 is forcing me to make the most of my chosen subject. I have 7 other main aperture values to choose from on my lens. I'd prefer to pick one of those instead and, well, just see where they take me. Well, if any of this is making you think about your photography, giving you ideas, inspiring you maybe, well, all of this I have covered over in my E6 subscription. This is where my real content is. Content I can't show you here on YouTube, such as my e-guides and podcast, my exclusive on-location videos where I illustrate all these ideas. I know you watch YouTube for its free content in return for watching its ads and the necessary in-video sponsorship deals. You know the ones. But not wanting to go down that path myself, instead I offer the alternative in my unique subscription. Instead of trying to sell you a website platform, I want to offer you real content, all packaged in my E6 subscription. Without E6, there would be none of this. I would not be sat here talking to you. It helps support this free content. I certainly don't want to ask you for donations without giving you something back. That's E6. So see my website for more details and to subscribe. Or don't. It's up to you. But if you don't, accidents can happen. So you may think you know about apertures, but do you really know about them? Have you explored all that they can do and what they can offer your photography? Forget the technicalities and instead explore the creativity they offer. Let me know in the description below what your favourite aperture is and why. Let's see if f8 is as popular as it thinks it is. And join me next time. Next time I'm testing a new camera. So join me next time for that, and then the video after that for a look at shutter speeds. I'll see you then.